Rome, the greatest empire the ancient world had ever seen. Its laws were carved in stone. Its power was built on fear and on secrets that were never meant to come to light. The decisions that changed the fates of millions were not made in the Forum. They were made in dim rooms, under seal, in silence. Behind every great Rome stood another Rome, invisible, where conspiracies were born in corridors where no one asked unnecessary questions. What if Rome's greatness rested not on laws, but on blood? At the height of its power, Rome governed millions across 3 continents. The system worked, but behind every law stood a punishment. In Rome, the law was public. Every citizen knew the cost of breaking it. This was not a warning, it was a promise. The word supplicium in Roman law meant the ultimate penalty, not merely execution, the ceremonial destruction of a person by full force of law. Historians left us their testimony, not all of them wanted to. The Tarpeian Rock, the southern cliff of the Capitoline Hill, 25 meters of sheer drop. For 7 centuries, this was Rome's official place of execution for traitors. For a Roman citizen, this was not an abstraction. The law could reach anyone. All it took was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The Capitoline Hill was the heart of power. Here stood the temples of the gods, and here, just steps away, was the place of execution. The rock was not hidden, it was visible. Rome wanted it to be seen. Executions at the Tarpeian Rock were public ceremony. Citizens gathered at the base. This was not mob justice. This was a state ritual. The path upward. These were the steps climbed by those who would not return. A laurel branch, not a sign of triumph, a sign that the law had already decided. Those who stood below and watched knew. Tomorrow, it could be one of them. The law of the Tarpeian Rock was written down, clearly, without ambiguity. Crimes against the state were punished by precipitation from the cliff, a bureaucratic word for a terrible death. The magistrate, the representative of the law, his duty to carry out the sentence, personally, at the very edge. The lictors, symbol of state authority. The fasces, a bundle of rods with an axe inside, reminded everyone, the law has force. 25 meters down. For Rome, this was not cruelty, this was justice. The rocks at the base held traces. Rome had used this place for centuries. But the most terrible punishment in Rome did not happen on the cliff. It happened in complete silence, underground. But the most terrible punishment in Rome did not happen on the cliff. It happened in complete silence, underground. The Temple of Vesta, round, sealed. Here burned a fire that had no right to go out, not for a single day across 7 centuries of the Republic. The fire could not be allowed to die. If it died, Rome's future died with it. That was the belief. That was the fear. And the Vestals understood this better than anyone. Every day, every morning, the hands that fed the flame carried the fate of the entire empire. The Vestals took their vow for 30 years. Celibacy, service, inviolability. In Rome, they were virtually the only women the law protected as individuals. White ribbons, ritual flower, a bronze vessel, an entire life in objects. A Vestal did not belong to herself, she belonged to the fire. When a Vestal walked through Rome, even the Forum fell silent. The crowd parted. Even a man condemned to death could escape his sentence by crossing her path by chance. The House of the Vestals, a closed world inside an open city. Here they lived, prayed, kept state secrets, and here, sometimes, accusations were born. An accusation of incestum, breaking the vow, was equivalent to a verdict. A shadow was enough, a rumor, a silhouette in the dark. When the flame in her hands died, she already knew. Defending herself was pointless. The law had already decided without her. The word incestum, carved into wax. Beside it, the official seal of the College of Pontiffs. From this moment, she ceased to be a Vestal and ceased to be protected. The trial of the Vestals was not a trial in any modern sense. The pontiffs gathered, looked at the scroll, pronounced their verdict. Rome called this justice. She was not asked, she was not heard. She stood with her head bowed, and that was all that was required of her. Rome did not execute Vestals before witnesses. It allowed her to pass and then forgot everything. The city watched. and chose silence. By ancient custom, she was carried in a covered litter so that no one would ever see her again. Curtain closed, verdict sealed. The vitae ribbons were untied last. While they remained in her hair, she was still a Vestal. When they fell, she became no one. Campus Sceleratus, the field of the damned, beyond the Colline Gate, outside the sacred boundaries of the city. A place Rome deliberately left unnamed in official texts. The staircase down, into the dark, a torch at the entrance, the only light. Then even that remained outside. She was not killed, she was left. Bread, water, a lamp, a little oil. Everything needed to survive a few more days and understand that there was no way out. The stone closed, the light disappeared. But Rome knew how to turn fear not only into silence. Sometimes it turned it into a spectacle for 50,000 spectators. The Colosseum, 80,000 tons of travertine and concrete, the largest amphitheater in human history. It was not merely an arena, it was a machine. On festival days, all of Rome flowed to its arches, rich and poor, senators and slaves. The Colosseum was one of the few places where they sat, almost side by side. 50,000 spectators, in the blazing midday heat, on stone benches. They did not come for the spectacle of death, they came for confirmation of order. Every entrance was designed so the arena could fill within minutes. Rome knew how to organize a crowd. That too was part of the system. For many of them, this was not the first time, and not the last. Death in the arena had become part of the urban routine, like the market, the baths, the temple. The tessera, a bronze token with a seat number, free distribution for the poor. Rome bought loyalty with bread and spectacle. The Colosseum was the most expensive entertainment in history. Beneath the arena, the hypogeum, a labyrinth of corridors, elevators, and cages. Spectators saw nothing of what happened below. That was part of the design. The cages held what would emerge into the light within minutes. Rome knew how to create anticipation. An invisible threat is more terrifying than a visible one. A bolt, a leather glove, one gesture, and the mechanism set in motion. The machine began to work. Noxi, condemned criminals, deserters, prisoners of war. They walked the corridor knowing what lay ahead. Rome called this just punishment. From above, the arena looked like a blank page. 50,000 spectators, one condemned man, a ratio of forces Rome considered correct. The editor, the games master, his gesture decided everything. One signal of the hand, and fate was determined, publicly, before witnesses, by the rules. The crowd responded as a single organism, bodies leaning forward, fists clenched. Rome turned death into a collective experience. A man in the third row, half a smile, he had seen this many times, but each time, again. This was not cruelty, this was tradition. A woman turned away, not from weakness, from choice. In Rome, even turning away was a political act. The gate opened, the camera stayed on the faces. Some smiled, others closed their eyes. A torn piece of cloth fell onto the sand. That was enough. Afterward, the sand was raked over, the traces disappeared. Until next time, the arena was perfectly designed to leave no evidence. A scrap of linen in the dust, all that remained. Rome did not bury those the arena took. It erased them like a stain in the sand. 50,000 people went home. Tomorrow, market again, baths, temple. The arena had done its work. Order had been confirmed. An empty arena at sunset. The Colosseum did not need people to inspire fear. It simply stood and reminded. A slave with a rake appeared immediately after the spectators. His task, to erase everything, level the sand, remove the traces. Rome knew how to start with a clean slate. But the most dangerous murders in Rome did not happen in the arena. They happened at the banquet table. The same table, the same candles, the same cups. Everything looked like an ordinary evening. That was precisely what made it most dangerous. In the warped reflection of a bronze cup, the silhouettes of guests, none of them knew who was watching whom. A small room, dried herbs, glass vials, no labels. Rome had created the first profession it would never officially acknowledge, the professional poisoner. Locusta, the woman Nero would later call his teacher in the art. She did not invent poisons, she perfected them, methodically, like a craftsman. Leaves, berries, mushrooms, bark, powder. No labels, no instructions, knowledge passed from hand to hand and was never written down. The dark liquid poured slowly, a few drops, enough for one person, sometimes for an entire family. The vial disappeared into the folds of cloth. Poison traveled like money, invisibly and quickly. No smell, no color, no trace. The triclinium, 4 or 5 adult guests, bread, olives, roasted fowl. An evening that looked like any other evening in Rome. A servant carrying a platter. In every Roman murder at the table, there was always a servant who knew nothing, or who knew everything. Wine was poured, the cup filled, nothing unusual. That was precisely what made it possible. A gold signet ring, Agrippina's hand. One pass over the cup, one gesture that decided the fate of the empire. One drop, the wine swallowed it without trace. The surface closed, as if nothing had happened. Agrippina watched Claudius, calmly, without triumph, without fear. Her face was a mask, perfect, years in the making, honed to perfection. Claudius, the 4th princeps of Rome, scholar, historian, lame, a stammerer, a man no one took seriously until he became emperor, and whom everyone underestimated until the very end. He smiled and reached for the mushrooms. Agrippina did not eat, she watched, between them, the entire table, and all of Roman history. The cup rose to his lips, the dark wine reflected the candle flame. One sip, the last. Claudius drank as he had drunk 1,000 times before. Nothing changed on his face. That was precisely the point. The smile still held when his hand went slack. The cup struck the marble floor and shattered. Agrippina did not move. The crime was sealed with a single mask. 2 shards of a bronze cup on cold marble, a dark wine stain spread between the joints of the slabs. Rome changed rulers, quietly over dinner. The guests froze, no one cried out, no one called for help. Rome knew when it was better to stay silent. The same weapon, a different table, a different cup. History repeated itself, because it worked. Britannicus took one sip and went still. The cup rolled across the marble floor. Nero's face did not change. The future tyrant was learning in silence. When Claudius died, the empire exhaled. No one knew the next breath would be worse. Rome greeted its new ruler with hope. Young, educated. They said, "This one will be different." They always said that. White marble, soft features, neat curls. The official portrait always lied. That too was part of the system. Nero was 17 when Agrippina placed him on the throne. In his early years, he ruled gently. He abolished secret trials. He gave the Senate more authority. He wanted to be an artist, not a tyrant. The Praetorian Guard welcomed him, spears pointing downward. For now, the army always waited to see who would prove stronger. A new coin, a new profile. Propaganda began with copper and silver, the emperor's face in every pocket of every citizen. The palace, long corridors, closed doors, behind each one, a decision that would change someone's life or end it. In 37 AD, Caligula fell gravely ill. Rome prayed for him. Sacrifices were offered. Some pledged their own lives in exchange for his recovery. Some sources say their prayers were answered. The illness lasted several weeks. Fever, delirium. When he recovered, something had changed. He opened his eyes. He was alive. But those who looked at him in that moment said afterward, he came back, but came back as someone else. The throne waited. A purple cloak lay across it, as a reminder. Power did not disappear while its master was ill, it simply waited. He sat on the throne, straightened, and looked. Same man, different eyes. Rome had received a ruler it had not anticipated. The senators looked and did not recognize him. They kept silent. Objecting was pointless. Objecting was dangerous. Fingers closed on the throne's armrest. Slowly, then opened again. The gesture repeated, again and again. Rome did not notice until it was too late. Sceleratus, Caligula's white horse, reportedly ate from marble mangers, drank wine from golden cups, was appointed a priest, possibly a consul. Historians debate the details. The basic fact is not in doubt. Caligula stroked his horse, behind him, senators with bowed heads. The humiliation needed no words. It was geometry. The horse at the center, the people at the periphery. Gold, purple, peacock feathers, dozens of burning lamps. Caligula had turned power into a religion with one worshiper and one god, himself. Romans whispered of a bond no one dared name aloud. A forbidden closeness in one touch of hands at the banquet table. The senators looked into their cups. It was a survival skill. In Caligula's Rome, not seeing was safer than seeing. Night in the palace, corridors where decisions were made that would never be recorded. The torch burns, the shadow moves. The Praetorians, 3 men in a dark corridor. The decision had already been made. All that remained was to carry it out. A hand on the hilt of a dagger, the blade still in its sheath. But the choice had already been made. In Rome, killing an emperor was called many things, depending on who won. The torch fell. Sparks scattered across the marble floor. The flame died. The corridor went dark. Caligula had ruled for 3 years, 10 months, and 8 days. A single sandal on the cold floor. All that remained of a man who thought he was a god. The senators stood against the wall in the adjoining room. Their shadows were longer than they were. They had survived because they were not where it happened. On the palace terrace stood a young man, looking out over Rome. His name was Nero. But Rome had not yet seen the ruler who would turn an entire city into a stage for his own legend. The shadow of Caligula still lay over the city. His name was struck from inscriptions, his face erased from coins. But history does not tolerate a vacuum. A new ruler was already at the threshold. Nero was 17 when Agrippina placed him on the throne. In his early years, he ruled gently. He abolished secret trials. He gave the Senate greater authority. He wanted to be an artist, not a tyrant. He performed in public. Rome had never seen anything like it. A ruler on stage, instrument in hand. The senators did not know how to respond. But behind his back stood his mother. Agrippina had placed her son on the throne. She had eliminated rivals. She had poisoned an emperor. She expected to govern through Nero, as regent without a crown. Nero removed her from state councils, then expelled her from the palace, then from Rome. Agrippina was left alone in her coastal villa at Baiae. Nero sent a ship, specially modified to sink at sea. Agrippina swam free, reached the shore, then he sent men with orders. Tacitus recorded her final words. She pointed to her abdomen and told the soldiers, "Strike here." The account is difficult to believe. The intent is not. It was July 64 AD. Rome was suffocating in the heat. The insulae, 6-story wooden tenement blocks, stood wall to wall. Wooden beams overhung narrow alleyways. Rome was built from what burns. The fire began on the night of July 18th, near the trading stalls close to the Circus Maximus. The specific cause remains unknown to this day. In 6 days, the fire destroyed 10 of Rome's 14 districts. Wind carried it from roof to roof. There was nothing and no one to stop it. Hundreds of thousands were left homeless. Entire districts vanished. Rome, as generations had known it, no longer existed. Where was Nero while Rome burned? Sources disagree. Suetonius claimed he watched from the Esquiline hill and sang. Tacitus wrote that Nero returned and opened his gardens to refugees. The truth was lost in legend, but a different truth was undeniable. Nero exploited the fire. On the ruins of 3 districts rose his golden palace, the Domus Aurea. Nero needed someone to blame, not for justice, for explanation. Suspicion of arson had fallen on Nero himself. He needed to redirect it. Nero pointed to the Christians, a small community in Rome. They were accused of arson. The executions became public spectacle in Nero's own gardens. Tacitus wrote this plainly. People did not believe in their guilt. They were destroyed not for justice, for spectacle, to redirect attention. On the ashes of 3 of Rome's districts, Nero began building the Domus Aurea, the Golden Palace, vast, with an artificial lake, with gilded vaults, for himself alone. The executions in Nero's gardens are recorded by Tacitus. The condemned were used as light sources for his night banquets. History noted this without comment. Nero ruled 4 more years after the fire. Then a revolt began. Then another. In 68 AD, he fled Rome. The Senate declared him an enemy of the people. He died by a dagger blow, by his own hand, assisted by a servant. Rome had burned. Nero had rebuilt it for himself. His name became synonymous with tyranny. But history does not end with him. A ruler was coming who would not merely destroy people, he would attempt to destroy faith itself. Nero is dead. 50 years, 8 emperors. Rome thought it had already seen everything. The Forum was restored. Nero's name was erased from inscriptions. The empire worked again, bureaucratically, mechanically, like a clock that keeps ticking even after the clockmaker has died. But history was pausing. In 218 AD, in Syria, a 14-year-old priest was given command of the 3rd Gallic Legion. Within a month, he was ruler of Rome. His name was Varius Avitus Bassianus. Rome would remember him by another name, the name of his god, Elagabalus, named for the sun god he served. He was brought to Rome in a gilded chariot. At the head of the procession rode the central relic of his cult, the sacred stone, a meteorite, a black conical fragment of the sky that had become a god. For him there was no distinction between worship and governance. He danced around the altar. He served his god every morning before receiving the Senate. The sacred stone, the Vestals, was transported to Rome in a covered wagon as if it were a living being. The procession moved through the entire city. Elagabalus walked ahead of the wagon facing backward, facing the stone. It was a gesture of reverence to his god. Rome did not understand. A dedicated temple was built for the stone on the Palatine Hill. The traditional gods of Rome, Jupiter, Mars, were declared subordinate to the new god. Priests of other cults could not perform rites without Elagabalus's permission. Eastern incense replaced the traditional sacrifices. At official receptions, Elagabalus appeared in gold-embroidered silk, with earrings and ceremonial kohl, the appearance of a priest of his cult. The senators watched with expressions difficult to fit into the official record. Written accounts from that period are very careful with their phrasing. Cassius Dio, senator and historian, attended the sessions. He wrote, "Elagabalus defiled everything he touched. The specific details he left unrecorded." Some things are difficult to fit into the official narrative, especially the nightly rituals in the temple of Elagabalus. Outsiders were not admitted. Guests were invited. No one explained what exactly they were there to witness. Rumors spread from the palace to the barracks and back. The Praetorian Guard was keeping count, not of years, of grievances. They had already killed Caligula. They remembered how it worked. The only question was, when? What occurred inside was described in official sources only through negations. What should not have, what had no right to. Cassius Dio wrote briefly, "Certain things are better left unnamed." Behind the bronze doors burned a red light. He invited Rome's high priests to participate in a secret ceremony. Some of them agreed. Those who emerged before dawn stopped commenting on what had occurred. Shadows on the wall, red light, nothing more from outside. Rome began keeping a second count, not of years of rule, but of violations. Witnesses did not speak, or could not. Then he went further. He proposed a bride for the god Elagabalus, a Vestal, a priestess of the goddess Vesta. Her vow of chastity was considered the foundation of divine protection for the entire empire. He called it the marriage of the gods. Rome called it sacrilege. The Senate demanded an audience. It was denied. The ceremony took place at the altar of Vesta, a gold ring on the stone, the Vestal beside it, in white, motionless. The sacred fire burned. This was not a ritual of love, it was the seizure of Rome's most protected religious institution. Elagabalus's mother negotiated with the Praetorians. In March of 222 they acted. Alexander Severus took the throne within hours. Rome barely noticed the transition. The system continued to function. Because Rome was not destroyed by its secrets, it learned to turn them into a method of governance. If this story sounds like a nightmare, remember, for the Romans this was politics. Rome did not hide fear. It built fear into the system, and the system worked. 1,800 years later, we are still reading their records. If you want more stories that were meant to stay buried, stay with us. Rome keeps speaking. You just have to know how to listen. Subscribe. The next story is already waiting. Rome was not destroyed by barbarians overnight. It collapsed from within, slowly, methodically, at the hands of those who had sworn to protect it. Every tyrant believed he was the exception. Every one was part of the system. Suetonius, Tacitus, Cassius Dio. They wrote in an era when writing the truth was dangerous. They left us not merely history, they left us a warning. The question is whether we know how to read it. 2,000 years have passed, and nothing fundamental has changed. Power still seeks ways to legalize fear. History is still written by the victors, and the truth is still hidden between the lines. The dark secrets of Rome are not in the past. They are in how any power is structured. Rome was simply honest enough to write it down. Stay with us. The next story is waiting.